Hello, my name's Jade and today I'm going to be discussing all of the books I read in September. September flew by and it felt like I read a ton, but by the time we got to the end of the month it turns out I only read 5 books, which isn't, I'm not complaining, it just felt like a lot more while I was reading them. I did start another 2 that I didn't actually finish as well, so I'll quickly mention them now. First being The Sandman by Neil Gaiman. It is a graphic novel and the Netflix show. I think it came out in August and I want to read the graphic novels before I watch the show, and the show, at least season 1, covers the first 2 graphic novels. So I started reading the first one. I think I read like the first issue beginning of this month and then the second issue at the end of this month. So it's slow going. I think I struggled with the first issue a little bit. It's a lot more text dense than a lot of the graphic novels I read, and it definitely does have like an older vibe to it, a high fantasy vibe. But I struggled with it a little bit, but I'm definitely intrigued by this world, and I determined that I have to finish this before I can start any more graphic novels, and there are quite a few that I want to read in October. I have quite a lot of cozy autumnal ones and some spooky ones I want to read, so I'm hoping I'm gonna finish it soon. And secondly is Verity by Colleen Hoover. I was literally just listening to this just now, so this is like right at the forefront of my brain. I started it a few days ago. I'm filming this on October 1st, so technically I'm not going to finish it in September, obviously, but I will definitely finish it soon. This is how much I have left. It's plausible that I even finish that today, but I did read the majority of this in September, which is why I'm quickly mentioning it now. I feel like something looks off with my makeup. My eyeliner isn't even. We don't need to talk about it though. Anywho, 5 books read. 4 of them are novels and 1 of them is a non-fiction. I audiobooked the majority of them. I audiobooked 4 of them. Yeah, let's get started. The first one I finished was Dangerous Remedy by Kat Dunn. I've owned this one for a really long time, since like more or less when it came out. I want to say it was in 2020. Book is on upside down. Great start. Yeah, 2020. And it takes place during the French Revolution. We're following a group of rebels. We open in a prison heist and they pull out a girl with mysterious abilities. And it very much gave me Six of Crows vibes, and I know that a lot of them are queer. I don't know, I just remember reading that like it's queer and it takes place during the French Revolution and there's heists and there's magic, and that intrigued me, and the cover is beautiful, so I got it. I do love this cover, it's stunning. I loved the setting of Paris. I went to Paris earlier this year. Reading about all the locations was really fun. I'm not an expert in the French Revolution, so I don't know, but it felt very authentic. The location felt great. That kind of atmosphere in general was really well done. But I had a lot of problems with the writing. There are a lot of cliches, lots of like swallowing emotions and biting lips, and sometimes characters would do something like really cliche like that in a moment where it was an opportunity to like show their character and I was expecting them to do something different, and then they would do something like that and it'd be disappointing. There's a lot of modern language kind of used, and it like, I don't think it fit the tone very well. A lot of exposition in dialogue, there was a lot of over explanation, there was like describing characters while we're in their POV, like how their reactions were, but they're reading from their perspective, so like how did they know what they looked like in that moment? These characters are supposed to be capable of all these really big jobs, and like the plot moved really slowly. So we have this job with this mysterious girl. 2 different groups of people both want this girl. The 2 different sides of the revolution. There's a deadline in 4 days to figure it out. We do nothing. Nothing gets done. No plan comes up with all the research they do. Like they just sit around and talk for most of it. They don't actually do anything. So if they are managed to pull off all these cool jobs, and like how did they do that? Like I hate when we have these really capable characters that can do all these cool things and then there's no evidence of them actually doing it. The characters I kind of think were somewhat stereotypical. The main girl Cam almost gave me Kaz vibes, and I think because she ended up doing these weird cliche behaviors that pulled away from it, but I think she had potential to be very Kaz-like. But there were red flags with her, like the way she was treating people and the way she was treating her girlfriend, and there was like almost like a love triangle situation happening. It wasn't okay. It wasn't okay, and no one was like talking about how it's not okay. The other main character, Ada, rooted for her. She was my favorite character. She was the one I was rooting for. This is the first book in a trilogy, and I don't know whether I want to read the other 2 or not. I'm normally not someone who will start like a series without at least dedicating myself to trying to finish it. There are a couple of trilogies I've read the first book of and I have the second books and I've not read them, so I'm obviously not doing very well. But generally I tried to keep going on with the series, and I did really enjoy the setting. The idea in general was interesting, but because not a lot was actually done, it felt pretty flat for me. The writing wasn't the best, but then it was quite easy to look past that. Like, I read it relatively quickly. I read actually the vast majority of this in August. I just finished it on September 1st. It never felt like a chore to read. It was always easy to read and to get through however many pages I wanted to get through that day. I kind of enjoyed it. Like, I enjoyed reading it while I was reading it. Yeah, so I don't know. I think I'd give it like I give it 2 stars, so it probably is around a 4 out of 10. That was actually the one book that I didn't audiobook. The rest of these I audiobooked, and I will put the narrators on screen because I forgot to check who they were for this video. I know this one though. This is Meaty by Samantha Irby, and this is narrated by Samantha Irby. Samantha Irby is a comedian, I believe. She had a blog, I think it's like Bitches Gotta Eat or something to that effect. Yeah, Bitches Gotta Eat. And I think that's how she became more known. Her other 2 novels, well, not novels, they're all non-fiction. We Are Never Meeting in Real Life and Wow, No Thank You have a lot of hype. This is the first non-fiction that she published and is the lesser known one, and it's the one with the least amount of hype. I read it first because if it's non-fiction, like, I kind of wanted to go in chronological order. I thought that made sense. And so having said that, I'm definitely going to read at least one of the other 2 because those are the ones that have more hype and people recommend more. I didn't love this. I think the problem with it, I've only ever heard about how funny Samantha Irby is. They're comedic. It's about her complaining about life, for lack of a better term. Talking about her life in general as well a bit, in these like little short essays. And I feel they were written fine. I didn't have any complaints with the writing. I didn't love her narration. Like, she has quite a monotone voice, and so a lot of the comedy just didn't transfer as well for me. That's my biggest problem. I didn't find it that funny. I just didn't click with the style of humor. It can be quite vulgar, for lack of a better term. Like, it can be quite gross at times, and I'm not big on that. That's no fault of the book. Like, some people do enjoy that humor. I'm by no means trying to bash the book. I just didn't click with me because I didn't find it funny, and I think that's probably the biggest appeal. There were some essays about like her childhood and more about her personal life, and I really enjoyed those. I thought those were really, really interesting. To be fair as well, the non-fiction I'd read before this, Eat, Pray, Love and Tiny Beautiful Things, which very tonally different, incredibly very tonally different. Some of them I enjoyed, some, like, none of them I hated. Like, it was still worth the read. It was interesting when I read it. It just wasn't my favorite or anything. But I would give this one probably also a 4 out of 10. That sounds harsh though. So it's a rough start to the month, it seems. But don't worry, it goes up from here. The next book I read in September was The Once and Future, which is by Alex E. Harrow. This is another one that had been sitting on my shelves for a while, so I was like, I have to get around to reading this at some point. The plan for September was to read new releases, like Carrie Sotto's Back came out at the very end of August, and Natalie Haynes' Stone Blind came out halfway through this month, although I only just received it the other day, so clearly I didn't read that this month. But I was just really feeling the autumn vibes, and I really wanted something autumnal, and originally I wanted to read this in October, but my October TBR was pretty long, so I was like, maybe I should read one of them now to make sure I actually do read it. And this is just the one that was calling to me. I sampled the audiobook. She had a really unique voice. Like, she sounded, I mean this in the best way, but she sounded like an old woman that like lives in a cottage like on the edge of the village that would tell you stories. That was how she sounded to me, and like, I mean that fully as a compliment, but it very much had that vibe to the audiobook, and there was like little music snippets here and there, and I think the audiobook was really well done. I would like to reread this without the audiobook, I think, just to see. I feel like I could have connected to it even stronger if it wasn't for the audiobook, just because I could have had my own interpretation of things. I still enjoyed the audiobook. It was still worth listening to. I still would highly recommend it. I just would also like to reread it without the audiobook, so I have experience of both. So this is set 1893. It's when women are trying to get the vote. It takes place in New Salem, which I believe is like a fictional town. So New England, America. There's no such thing as witches, but there will be. Like, witches used to exist. Witching still exists as like a practice. People can still perform spells, but witches themselves like don't really exist anymore. Like, no one's powerful enough to actually be a witch. They can just control music, and like, actually witching is illegal. You're not supposed to be doing it. This is about 3 sisters, and they all come together in New Salem. They were estranged for quite a few years, and they're sick of being downtrodden on, and they're trying to bring witching back. And also, like, it merges with the suffragette movement, and all these themes kind of coalesce into this beautiful, beautiful book. This is easily my favorite book that I've read so far this year. I was like literally thinking a few weeks ago about how I hadn't read a book this year that was like a new all-time favorite. Like I hadn't read a 10 out of 10 yet. I'd read some that came really close. For whatever reason, just didn't quite make the mark. I'm pretty sure this is a new all-time favorite. I do give it 10 out of 10. I loved the themes, obviously. I loved the relationships. This is another point where I think if I had read it, my interpretation allowed me to feel even closer to some of those relationships. I did feel distance to some of them in the audiobook. I mean, the writing is stunning. The amount of times I like read a line I had to stop and go, whoa, that is beautiful, and like it feels so real, and like the truth of the words and the weight of them. So many like tabs in here for quotes that I loved. If I tabbed every single line that I really loved, it would be full of tabs. I had to like save it for the really special ones. Setting felt very real. These characters felt very real. Just such a beautiful story. It's ferocious and beautiful and haunting and clever and endearing, and it's so full of heart. Like these characters feel so hard and they try so hard. Another reason why I even picked this up in the first place is because Laini Taylor blurbed it, and she wrote the Daughter Smoke and Bone trilogy, which is one of my favorite trilogies. She also wrote Strange Dreamer, which I've not read yet. I forever feel shame. I'm getting to it this year. I'm determined but I'm getting to it by the end of the year. She said a gorgeous and thrilling paean to the ferocious power of women. The characters live, bleed and roar, and I couldn't agree more. It's really clever as well, like the themes and the symbolism. A lot of these characters, through women, like it's so in your face that they're archetypes or like witches, the mother, the crone and the maiden, and yet they're so unique. They contrast that so well, but then they also fall into the trap of being archetypes, and they like it's really cleverly done. Family themes, feminist themes, witches, historical fiction, New England times in the 1800s, late 1800s. If any of that appeals to you, I couldn't recommend it more. Obviously, I give it a 10 out of 10. Mad Woman by Taylor Swift as well. If you want a book that is that song, this is the book. Like, they work together so well. Yeah, the audiobook was really atmospheric and I enjoyed it. I had loads of hype in and around when it came up. It was like the Waterstones book of the year. This one also take place in 1893. When did the Once and Future Witches take place? 1893, they take place in the same year. I didn't even realise. Wow, how cool is that? It starts off in London, but then we spend most of it in Colchester and a coastal parish of Old Winter. We do spend time in London as well, we go back and forth. We're following Cora Seaborn, who's recently been widowed, and her husband didn't treat her the greatest, and her son, I'm pretty sure he's on the spectrum, or that's the strongest thing that it reminded me of, but they don't understand him quite. And so she's just kind of feeling a bit meh, and so she decides to go to Colchester. She loves would it be geology? Like she loves finding fossils, like the natural world and stuff like that. So she goes trying to find fossils because there was recently an earthquake and loads have been moved and stuff. And there have also been rumours of an Essex Serpent causing havoc, essentially killing animals and taking people and stuff like that. And this was a real thing. I don't know if it came up again in 1800s, but it definitely was around in the 1600s. It was a genuine rumor, and this earthquake did happen. So I think a lot of it is based off of historical accuracy. There are also a lot of like socialism themes in here. Cora Seaborn's companion Martha is big on socialism, and I've heard the author talking about she really wanted a Victorian novel that shows that women were very strong and capable and smart and cared about politics and the natural world, and it very much does that. Our lead character, Cora, she's so interesting. She's very complex, very strong-willed, very strong-willed. Her ideas on gender are quite modern, you would think, but again, that's the point of the author, to show that they're not modern, they're around back then. We just don't talk about it as much. There's a big theme of like superstition and religion and the power of belief, the power of fear and like fear-mongering. Hysteria, that one. And like sin and virtue, like those themes are prevalent in here. Again, maybe it'd be worth rereading this one with my eyes rather than an audiobook to really like grapple with the themes. I did read some chapters without listening to audiobook, and I like in the beginning I didn't love the writing, I struggled with it, but when I read it with my eyes I found it easier to get through. Once I had read a couple with my eyes, like going back to the audiobook, I did find it easier. It's just that like details would pass me by that were really relevant. Like it's full of like really crystal clear, beautiful little details, and they would just like go over my head, and I was like, what? So I did in the end really love the writing. It was very captivating, it was very witty, very atmospheric. It suited the book very well. The atmosphere and the setting was really thick, like you were completely transported away. It's one of those where you completely lose yourself to the story and like you're there, you're in Oldwinter and Colchester, and it's like cold and smoggy and dark and gloomy. I loved the atmosphere of it. Every time I read so much as a page, I was just transported away, and I loved, like I said, the themes and the symbolism. It was all very interesting, and I feel like you really could grapple with it and like teach this in an English literature class because it's so rich and there would be so much for students to pull out. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about the direction of the overall story. Like, I know a criticism from a lot of people was they're expecting it to be something that it wasn't. I don't know how much I want to say about that because spoilers. The more I think about it now, actually, like, I think it couldn't have been any other way. It definitely feels like the kind of book that needs to be mulled over and digested slowly over time, and like you need to come back to it and you need to analyze it. Like, it's so rich in all of that stuff. And I also think it's one of those books that, because of that, demands to be reread. Like, I don't know how you could pull out all of the little themes and ideas and symbols and storylines and kind of messages in one reading. And I definitely think because of that, I can see my opinion changing over time, especially if I read it or even just like mulling over and think about it over time. And I can see my opinion like going up or down in terms of like rating. For now, I'm really glad that I read it. I found it really interesting. I was totally absorbed in it. It definitely fitted the vibe that I was looking for. It's a very peculiar book, and I'm very glad that I read it. Very charmed by it, and I do think it's very clever, but like I know that I've not been able to pull of it out, so it's hard for me to stand here and say it's the cleverest book I've ever read because I know that I've not getting it. But I don't think there's a fault of the book. I think there's a fault of me not getting it and my experience having read the book. I think I might even give it a 9 out of 10. I did really enjoy it, and I do think it was really clever. My camera keeps turning off and I have no idea why. Rude. The final book that I read this month was Carrie Sotto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is the last book, supposedly, I heard her say this in an interview, of her kind of companion style quartet, starting with Six Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, Daisy Jones and the Six, Malibu Rising, and then Carrie Sotto is Back. All of these focus particularly on a female, although Malibu Rising is debatable, but you can argue that your name is Nikki. They will have these strong female leads that are in the public figure. What am I trying to say? That, you know, are in the spotlight, they're famous, how that fame affects them and their relationships. And they each take place in a different decade. We start in the 60s, this one takes place in the 90s. Evelyn Hugo's an actress, Daisy Jones is a rock star, there's surfers in Malibu Rising, and Carrie Sotto is a tennis player. We are introduced to Carrie Sotto briefly in Malibu Rising. With these 4 books, some of them connect more than the others. I've audiobooked all of the Taylor Jenkins Reid's books that I've read so far. The audiobook was also really great. The audiobooks for these books are so good. Julia Whalen is in every single one of them, at least a little bit. She's in Malibu Rising the most. It doesn't feel like a Taylor Jenkins Reid audiobook without Julia Whalen. I tried to start listening to something else that she narrated by a different author, and I couldn't do it because it just kept making me think of Taylor Jenkins Reid. But yeah, there's that. They're all really great. A lot of them are full cast. Ironically, Malibu Rising I think is just Julia Whalen, but the rest of them are full cast because they have like little interviews and like little blog snippets and stuff like that in them. So we follow Carrie Sotto, who was introduced in Malibu Rising. She's a tennis player. The premise of the book is basically there's an up-and-coming tennis player, Nikki Chan, and she's threatening to break one of Carrie Sotto's records, and so Carrie Sotto, at like the age of 37, I believe she is, comes out of retirement to try and win back her record-holding title. I gave this book so much slack. Like, that, to say that is an understatement. I was like full on like, I don't understand why we're following Carrie Sotto, because the little bit we saw of her Malibu didn't seem like the most appealing character. The fact that it was about tennis, like I have zero interest in tennis, and I thought it was just gonna be really boring, and like it's about her, and like I was upset that it was the final book in this quartet situation because like I wanted it to go with a bang, and this didn't feel like that. Because I loved all 3 of the books that came before this. I was wrong. I'll admit when I'm wrong, and I was wrong. I really enjoyed this. It made me so emotional at the end that like I sat down to write my Goodreads review like an hour or so after I finished reading the book, and I started tearing up just writing the review. Like I couldn't stop crying. I teared up and cried a couple times throughout this book. It's very different in feeling to all of the ones that came before this, because all of the ones that came before this, timelines are played with, like we jump around in time in all of them, and a lot of like underground plots that, like come up at different points. The way the characters connect are a little bit more confusing, and their interactions, like they have bigger casts of characters. You all just have a very complex feeling to them. They all feel complicated and very layered. This one is much simpler. Like, it's written chronologically. We're just following Carrie from start to finish. Like, we start with her as a kid when she's learning tennis, and then we get up to when she's coming out of retirement, and it's very linear, and we're only following her perspective. So it's much simpler because of that. By no means is a fault. Like, this book couldn't have been done any other way. Like, it's her story through and through. Like, it just needs to be her story. Like, it being simple is by no means a criticism. And the character development, very well done. The themes of like feminism and how women are portrayed, also very well done. Carrie is still a flawed character, although we like understand her better through reading her perspective. It's very much like a Nesta from ACOTAR situation. Like, she's still flawed. You can still critique her. You can still say that she's a jerk a lot of the time, but maybe not as much of one as you originally thought. Her relationship with her father is by far the most important relationship in this book. And my God, it was touching. Does it live up to the other three? Does it feel as like big and exciting? Probably not, no. Does it feel like a big, exciting, crazy finale to the quartet again? Probably no, but this feels like it was very personal to the author as well. Like, reading the acknowledgements, I started crying again. And the way it feels stripped back, and it's such, I don't want to say it's a more emotional story than the other ones, but like, it is a very emotional story, and because of that, like, in its own way, it does end the quartet with a bang. And this is what having this book in the world took. Like, I'll take it. It was a very Taylor Jenkins Reid experience. Like, all of them, could not put them down. I think Malibu might be the one that I was the least sucked in by, but I still really love the story overall, so who cares. I think Daisy is still my favourite. Daisy Jones 6 is without a doubt one of my favourites. It's one of my favourite books ever, but I think this might be second. I think this might outrank Evelyn Hugo for me. So I think it would be Daisy Jones, Carrie Sotto, Evelyn Hugo, and then Malibu Rising last. The cover isn't great. I will also say that. I don't understand. It does feel very 90s, I suppose, and all of the covers feel very relevant to their time period. I've kind of come to love to hate it, you know? I would give Carrie Soto's back either an 8.5 or a 9. I'll say 9 for now. So we started this month shaky and we ended strong. I am by no means complaining. I'm very happy with the 5 books I read this month. And I'm very much so looking forward to all the books I read in October. I've got like some spooky books lined up and I'm excited. Yeah, those are all the books I had to talk about today. I would love to hear what you read in September, what your favourites were. If you've read any of these books, I'd love to know what you thought about them. And that is all I have for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a magical morning, afternoon, evening / night. My name's Jade. I hope I see you again next time. Goodbye!